We are back, Heartland Developer Conference 2016 here in Omaha, Nebraska, and we've been doing interviews with session keynotes and session leaders today. Today I have Jon Mills with me from Paige Technology.
Oh.
And Jon, good to have you back. Well,
there you go.
We'll give this a second round here. We were just joking. Forgot to turn the mute off the first time. And so we're better the second time around. Jon, let's get to know you a little bit, where you're from, what you do, your job, that kind of stuff.
So I am from Kansas City, Missouri. I always have to add the Missouri because I'm not from the Kansas side.
Is there a big battle between Kansas and Missouri?
Not really.
Turf wars?
It's more the external view.
Yeah.
But so I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, and I do mostly JavaScript consulting.
Yeah.
So trying to help companies kind of cope with this rise of JavaScript and what they're supposed to be doing with it now in the modern era. And I'm also a Pluralsight author. I've got 5 or 6 courses out there on Node.js and JavaScript. And I'm a conference speaker, so I get to travel all over the world and speak at conferences. And
how many do you do a year, do you
conferences,
think? Yeah.
Okay, so in a year is hard. Between now and the end of October, I've got 4. Okay. So it's not terrible.
Yeah.
It's, I average about 1 to 2 a month.
Fits in nicely with your Pluralsight work, and so you're kind of in that training and education space, anyway, so it works
totally
pretty well.
Sense.
JavaScript is the area you're talking about, and that seems to be a pretty exploding area these days. I hear it all the time. A couple years ago, it was not even in the conversation, or a little bit. Now we're hiring just JavaScript people.
Absolutely.
Talk about, what are you seeing?
So JavaScript is kind of taken over the world, and it just is. It used to be that we did jQuery, and that's all we did. Now we do JavaScript, and with the rise of the frameworks, it started with the knockouts and the backbones, and now we're into Angular and React and these big, robust frameworks that are making .NET and Java developers take their business code out of the back end and start to apply it into the front end. And so they're struggling with, how do I write business logic in JavaScript instead of .NET? And but it's not just that. It's not just the browser. You've got things like React Native and Ionic and things like that for the mobile device. And you even have Electron to make desktop applications. And you would think just some random ones like Slack and things like that. But Microsoft used Electron and Node.js when they built Visual Studio Code. So even Microsoft is saying, yeah, JavaScript is, if you want to do cross-platform stuff, JavaScript's the way to do it.
Yeah. Does that mean, is that spelling doom for Java and C#? Or
I don't think so.
What's the world look like today?
I think that those languages really do a very good job at what they do. And if you want to have a strong, robust backend it's pretty enterprise level, .NET and Java are not going to go away. Nobody's going to go rewrite their entire backend in Node. Node can handle it. I mean, Walmart's backbone is built in Node, right? So it can handle the traffic, but there's no reason to go rewrite all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so that will all still be there, and it'll move forward, and it's fine. But more and more people want the cool single-page app feel, and you've got to do JavaScript for that.
Yeah, we're in recruiting for what I do for Gallup. We're hearing from the business more that we want them to at least have some JavaScript in their background. Do you see, are we at a point where you have just JavaScript developers? Or are they a hybrid version of Java and JavaScript, or C# and JavaScript?
And I think that kind of falls all over the place, right? The vast majority of developers who do JavaScript will not classify themselves as a JavaScript developer. So when I'm in a talk, I always ask, who classifies yourself as a JavaScript developer? And I'm probably one of 3 in the room, always. I do Node on the back end. I do usually Angular on the front end. But most developers classify themselves as .NET or Java, and then they also do JavaScript. And what that means is at very different levels. But I think that the days of just pure, true JavaScript developers, those are growing, but I don't think they're ever going to overtake and be, hey, everybody's just a JavaScript developer.
Yeah, but it is becoming a huge need.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, from that standpoint, if I'm a C# or I'm a Java developer today, and I'm thinking all right, how do I need to start thinking about this. What's the right path, or what are some recommended paths? And I know you're going to talk about this a little bit in your session, but what are some recommended paths?
And so that's First and foremost is take it seriously. And I talk about this a little bit in my session. It's a lot of times we go to Stack Overflow when we find something that works and we drop it in, and then we go back to the code that matters, which is our .NET code, right? And so what a lot of people need to do is they need to really treat learning JavaScript like they're learning a new language. It's not an extension of .NET or Java. It's let's go learn something new. And so there's Pluralsight courses, there's code schools, there's Codecademy has a fantastic JavaScript thing. There's also a couple of really good books. Eloquent JavaScript is a good book. Kyle Simpson's got a whole series, You Don't Know JavaScript, that's really good books. I would highly recommend going out and actively seeking to learn JavaScript as if it's a new thing, and treat it that way. And just, pick up a book. Or if you're already a developer, you don't need to learn how to develop. You just need to learn the intricacies of the language.
So it is a situation. It depends on you, but you could do it on your own. You could. There's JavaScript classes, I'm sure, that you could jump into. Do you think the average developer could just kind of jump in and start doing it?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're already a developer, you can pick it up, right? Yeah. It's just a matter of intentionally trying to pick it up instead of just trying to get by.
Sure. So what else? From your session, you're certainly trying to get a few things across. Some of those we just talked about, but what else are you hoping to?
Okay, so my session is habits of highly effective JavaScript developers, and basically the crux of my talk is you are not a JavaScript developer. I mean, right? We just talked about this. Most people are .NET or Java developers, and then they also do JavaScript. And so what I try and point out is here is some things that you should be doing as a JavaScript developer. And I talk about things like linting your code and understanding that, the IDE might need to be different for your JavaScript stuff. There's better IDEs out there for JavaScript than Visual Studio. I also talk about just understand what your code is doing. A lot of times we go to Stack Overflow and find something that works. But instead, take 5 minutes and try and understand why that works, right? And just try and build a little bit more of a depth. And then I talk about some other intricacies of the language and packages to use and things like that. But ultimately, it's, hey, let's start to take JavaScript seriously. A lot of people refuse to refer to JavaScript as a modern language. They refer to like .NET and Java as modern languages, which is kind of weird considering JavaScript came later. So it's more modern technically, but it's just different. And
why do you think that is?
Because it doesn't have types.
Okay.
Right. I mean, it doesn't have types, and it's loosely objects, right? I mean, it's different, and it doesn't feel enterprising. But the reality is, if you embrace that, like I embrace the fact that it doesn't have types, and I embrace the fact that my objects are not set in stone. They can be changed as needed. And it actually makes your JavaScript development a lot cleaner and easier if I can just roll with that instead of trying to fight against it. And that's kind of what the TypeScript movement is a little bit, is trying to institute these .NET principles on top of JavaScript without everybody remembering underneath it, it doesn't work the way you think it's working. It just kind of masks some of it. And so instead of masking it, just embrace it and understand how it works and just go with it.
Are there some great examples of large organizations, large enterprise organizations moving with more of a JavaScript and less maybe on the traditional languages of C# or Java?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them, and just more and more. Walmart was a great example of embracing Node. Huge, and they wrote their own Node framework. Happy is their Node. A lot of people use Express. They use Happy. But Microsoft embraced JavaScript when they went Visual Studio Code, right? They said outright, if I want to do cross-platform stuff, JavaScript's the way to do it. And I mean, there's more and more people that are starting to think cross-platform stuff is required, right? You can't just target Windows anymore. You have to be cross-platform, and the best way to be cross-platform is doing JavaScript.
Yeah. What's the future look like when we look ahead? I know in any kind of these environments where especially it's very open, lots of people expressing their own opinion of what things should and shouldn't be. You get your own framework from Walmart because they want their own flavor of that. A continuation of more flavors, or will this get more centralized and maybe a little bit more controlled?
So I think we've already kind of seen it collapsing down a little bit because now it's basically React and Angular, and those aren't the only two. I mean, you talked about Meteor earlier. There's Vue. There's all these other options, but most people are doing one of those two things. I think that it'll be interesting to see what happens with Angular 2 with their focus on TypeScript. I do Angular 2, but I don't use TypeScript. I do it all in JavaScript. But I think that there's also going to be a move away from some of the monolithic frameworks, and more people are just going to go back to doing pure JavaScript because you don't need the big monolithic single page app all the time. Right? Sometimes you just need a little bit of JavaScript here and there. And so I'm actually starting to see people moving away from the big frameworks and doing like ampersand is kind of like the unframework where it has just little bits and pieces. And that's where I think a lot of people are going to go, is just kind of simplify the big monolithic thing and just start to use JavaScript in a way that makes a little bit more simple sense and instead of the big monolithic thing.
Is there a movement towards more simple in code? And I imagine this is a cycle that happens.
It is.
We get complicated. It gets too complicated. We make it simple. It's too simple, right?
So I think the whole left pad debacle. So what happened with left pad is there's a package out there that basically just padded a string, and it was a package. And some things happened, and he ended up dropping support for that and pulled it out of NPM, and everything broke. Like Babel used left pad, so everything broke. And I think that opened a lot of people's eyes, and they realized that the dependence on just random little packages here and there actually causes more harm than good. And so you're starting to see kind of the reaction to that, where people are pulling back a little bit from it. And you're right, it's completely cyclical. Right. For a while, everybody will pull back, and then everybody will forget about it, and then they'll go whole hog again. And it's
kind of the battle of open source versus closed. And we went open for a while, and then things break, and then you go closed and things break.
Well, in different regions will be at different points in that cycle, right? And so it's not like everybody will all be, no frameworks versus all frameworks. Some people will be kind of on the tail end, and some people will be on the front end, and it'll just kind of keep going.
Yeah. You mentioned Meteor, our high school interns. We landed on Meteor just because it was a very easy. I mean, it's
full
just
stack. It just works.
We developed some things on it. We've also been toying around with Python a little bit, and that seems like it's another script that comes and goes in its popularity.
It does.
Does this fit in? Does Python today fit into the JavaScript model? Are a lot of people using both?
Yes and no. I mean, Python's kind of its own thing, and I think that Python is very much becoming much more front and center. And part of the reason for that, it comes back to the simplicity thing, right? Where .NET and Java, the barrier to entry for those is very high. And what happens is sometimes we just want to get stuff done, right? I don't want to mess with the big monolithic frameworks. I just want to get my stuff done. And so Python is a great way to just get in and get things done and move on with your life. And so that's where some of these micro frameworks or these little scripting languages, and Python's not really a little scripting language, it's really powerful, but it's so easy to just get in and get stuff done with it. I think it's going to kind of take over.
Now we have found it as a low barrier to entry, especially in those roles, and we're finding more and more high schoolers are learning it and learning it on their own. Right. They've brought it home, or they have a science teacher who's turned them on to it.
And that's the thing, where when I was trying to get into programming, I didn't have the resources that we have today, right? Where we've got, just YouTube videos. Go ahead and Google Python tutorials, and you'll get all kinds of stuff. We've got Pluralsight is a fantastic resource. Actually, our library, so you might just check your library. My library system in Kansas City, I have free access to Safari Books Online. Any technology book I want to get access to, I just use my library card and I have it, right? It's just amazing to me, the resources that are available. OpenCourseWare is another one where my son was taking Python. Speaking of Python, he was taking a Python class that was taught by the dean of the computer science department of MIT online. Just watch the videos, do the homework. It's like, I never had that stuff.
It's a huge opportunity. Do you see that threatening? You're a Pluralsight instructor. Does all this open learning threaten Plural?
Nope.
And
I don't think so at all.
Not?
I think it's awesome.
Okay.
Because it gets people in line. And so to me, the value of Pluralsight, a lot of it comes from, I've always had a company pay for my membership for Pluralsight back before I was an author. And so what happens is there's all kinds of free resources out there, and they're of varying degrees of quality. And so you can kind of poke around and find the stuff you need. But if you want quality, if you want peer-reviewed, curated content, Pluralsight's the way to go. And you see a lot of people end up over there, especially at the enterprise level, when they're trying to really, really learn something.
Really dig in. We that's kind of what we use. We bring our interns in and we kind of regulate some of the things that they can, like, we want you to do this, and this. And we know, although I think you mentioned Microsoft has Virtual Academy and some of those pieces. And so they're doing a great job too. All of a sudden, Microsoft has become this weird, open, collaborative
job. I mean, I am out of the .NET realm, and I have been for a little while. But Microsoft has done a fantastic job of embracing some new things, and they're on the Node Foundation. They're doing a lot of stuff with Node. Visual Studio, not Visual Studio, but .NET Core has a lot of Node in the underpinnings of it, and I think that's awesome. And they're doing a very good job of thinking outside the box a little bit.
No, it's a different, with Satya Nadella in charge. It's just a completely different company, and interesting to kind of follow them in this rejuvenation, kind of a renaissance that's going on in the organization.
Oh, absolutely.
Paige Technologies, talk a little bit about what do you guys do? What's the value you bring to the? How do you guys make your?
So Paige Technologies traditionally was an IT staffing firm. Right. So they delivered, developers or IT staff for 6 to 12 month contracts and just, went and got stuff done. What we discovered, and this is why they brought me in, is a lot of times I don't need a contractor for 12 months or 6 months. I need somebody to come in for 3 months or for a week to tell me what to do. Right. And because that's the thing. I've got to pick a framework, right? I don't need somebody for 6 months to help me figure out whether I do React or Angular. But what Paige now can do with me and a few other consultants that they have is we do a lot of micro contracts, 8 or not 8 hours, although I've done a couple of those, 40 to 80 hours, or, even up to a couple of months doing proof of concept type work. And then once we've figured all that stuff out, now they can go hire their contractors. Yeah. We also do long-term projects. I mean, if you just want to bundle up a project and hand it off, we'll run those as well. But that's kind of our sweet spot right now, is let us come in and tell you what to do, and then you can bring in other people that you can tell what to do. Right? Yeah. That's kind of the breakdown.
Yeah, good. Anything else you'd add from your session that we may not have covered?
I don't think so. I mean, really, more than anything, it comes down to you're going to have to learn something new, right? I mean, nowadays you can't just get by with what you got. And if you're learning something new, JavaScript's the way to go. And if you're going to learn JavaScript, you're going to have to learn JavaScript, right? I mean, it's different enough that you need to dig in and bite the bullet on it.
Well, I agree with you. And I think it's easier to get these kids learning this earlier. Yep. And it's a great kind of gateway in. I think you're going to find people learning JavaScript first. Yep. And then maybe moving on to a C# or to a Java after that in the enterprise. It's not going anywhere in the enterprise, right? It's embedded pretty deep, and I think it's going to be around for a while. Yep. But certainly from that standpoint, one more question for you too. We talked about big enterprises using JavaScript. Okay. This got to have huge advantages in the startup world.
It's huge.
I mean, talk a little bit about that. What are you seeing?
So it's time to market, right? And so, like I said before, it's so much easier to get something done. I don't have this big monolithic thing. I can just, get something done fairly quickly. And so Node with Angular front end, kind of that mean stack thing. Yeah. One, it's free, which is huge. I don't have to buy SQL Server licenses. I don't have to buy, Visual Studio. And there's ways to not have to buy that already. I know, but the perception is I can just download all this stuff and I can be writing code in 5 minutes, and I can get things out the door a lot faster. And that's my contention. And a lot of people argue with me, and that's fine. But my contention is on the mean stack, I can get things out the door a lot faster.
What's the back end of that, though? What's the backside? Everybody, you know, so you can deploy quickly, you can write. There's got to be a reason we've had these heavy frameworks to begin with. What's the drawback today? If I'm a company starting to do this, what do I have to watch for on the backside?
So you're asking that to like the Node.js guys. So
well, sure, you can be honest.
No, and that's the thing, right? So in a lot of cases, what people struggle with is that, yeah, it's a little less well known, and it's a little more nuanced, and it can be a little more painful. And so when you get into problems. You get into problems. I mean, but here's the other thing, and this is really, I think, the main thing. If you're in an enterprise, it's all about needing to make a phone call, right? When I was in the enterprise, we were .NET people. I deployed code, and something was broken. I could call support at Microsoft and have like Microsoft people helping me. I don't have that with Node, right? I mean, I don't have a phone number that I can call and say, "Hey, I don't understand why my processes are spinning up." Right. And that's a legitimately big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's always been the problem in the open source communities. There always haven't been people there to
Where's
support
my support?
It.
Right.
And then it always seems, and maybe you can, it always seems like then there's an industry that develops around that. Yep. Do you think that'll happen? Is it already happening?
It already. I mean, MongoDB offers support, and you know, and there's others, but that will happen over time. But I think, especially with Node, with the way Node Foundation works, I don't know how that happens easily, but you're never going to get away from the fact that there's a company, right? Microsoft is an organization that is there that you can pick up the phone and call.
Right. Good. Good, John. Thanks for taking a few minutes today. Great catching up with you, and great discussion. I think a very, we've talked about JavaScript for the last year or two, but I think it's come. It's here. And Node has certainly been talked about for a while, but it's always on the fringe. And I think it has joined. It's joined in the big circle.
It's very much
and everybody's talking about it. So, John, thank you.
Cool.
Appreciate it.